Hey there, I'm Joni Deutsch. I'm a producer of podcasts here at WFAE, Charlotte's NPR news source. And if you are a fan of podcasts, you likely know of WFAE's new podcast. It's titled She Says. It's a year-long investigation into one woman's journey for a resolution, for justice, and for healing. I'm joined here today by Alex Olgin. She is WFAE's healthcare reporter, but she's also been a reporter on this She Says podcast. Today is the 4th episode launch of She Says, and so Alex has been doing a great deal of reporting for it. We're going to talk with her today about the podcast. So hi, Alex.
Hi, Joni.
So let's go ahead and get started. The 4th episode is a tricky episode because it gets into details that not a lot of us learned in middle school, and that is about DNA analysis and CODIS. So what can you tell us about this episode and your reporting on it?
Yes, so it's very complicated. It took months to sort of dissect this system, and just a brief explainer. CODIS is this database that all states have access to with DNA profiles of convicted felons and people that are arrested for some violent crimes. And the whole idea is that if someone's a serial offender and they commit a crime, that their the profile that they find on the crime scene, they can put into this database and it would match up with someone who's committed another crime, and it would be a faster way to identify and arrest a suspect. So that's the big picture. What we tried to do in this episode is figure out exactly what happened with the DNA sample that was in Linda's kit, because she identifies this man early on in her investigation, and then they tell her, no, it's not the man you identified because there's no DNA hit. Then it turns out, well, that's not quite true, and we try and explore how could that possibly happen.
This is something that is difficult, and I know it took a lot of research for you all to figure out like how to explain CODIS to an audience that, again, like I've never learned about CODIS in middle school, high school, college. So what was the process in you digging into how to explain this and how to learn about it for yourself?
A lot of reading. I read CODIS policies. I read stuff about DNA law.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah, lots of versions of DNA law, talking to a lot of experts, a lot of background research before talking to the experts and trying to fully understand how it works. Because like you said, it's complicated. There are multiple levels, multiple agencies that work together, which I know is normal in government, and especially with local, state, and federal. But of course, when you have a lot of people working together, there's more room for error. And so that is one of the things we had to figure out by talking to multiple people that work at different levels of the system.
One of the parts in this is, one of the parts of the case, of Linda's case, is that the perpetrator's DNA was put into CODIS incorrectly. How does that even happen?
So it can happen a bunch of different ways, but when the DNA system was established federally in the 90s, and then states made different laws about who they're going to put in their systems, and the systems all sync up, but each state has some leeway in who they want to put into the DNA system. And so as the laws changed, if you committed crimes before the laws changed, but your DNA was possibly entered, after the laws changed, maybe that makes it ineligible, and then it maybe should be pulled out. And there's someone who manages all these profiles, but there are hundreds of thousands of these. So it's it could happen that they don't realize that someone shouldn't be in there because the laws have changed, and therefore their sample is ineligible.
Another part of this case is that they're unable to tell Linda whose DNA it is, and until the very end of the episode. Spoiler alert! If you've not listened to episode 4, do that right now. But at the end of this episode, the detective tells her we're now going to get him, even though it's been a few years down the line since the assault occurred. Could they not tell her the name? Could they not get the search warrant immediately?
No, is the short answer. I mean, the lab is not able to reveal the identity, tell the police the name of this DNA sample match, because the person should not have ever been in the system. And that's what we were talking about. This law changes is what sort of made his sample ineligible to be in the system. And so what the lab does is they send a letter to the police saying, look, we have a match or a hit, but we can't tell you who it is because he's not supposed to be in there. And there are very specific laws that are written for a reason about whose DNA should be in the system, and privacy restrictions. And so they are bound by those restrictions.
It also sounds like, at least CMPD in this case, maybe they don't have the resources available to pursue as quickly or is needed. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
So, there are, of course, there are budgetary restraints, right? They can only have so many people working on sexual assault cases. They each have several cases that they're working on. If you're asking about the crime lab and processing DNA kits, that's sort of a different can of worms. we are lucky. Charlotte has its own crime lab, and they do process DNA kits, but there's lots of evidence that goes to the crime lab. It's not just sexual assault kits. It's other evidence from crime scenes. And so, there is a backlog. There are kits that are waiting in line to be tested because the scientists are just too busy testing other things. So we talked to this expert actually in episode 4 who says that is just sort of the saga, the story of all the crime labs across the country. There's a lot of evidence. Everyone wants DNA, but there's only a select number of people in each lab that can actually process that.
Then what needs to change about that?
Well, there could be more resources devoted to the labs, like they spend more money, hire more scientists. Some states have looked, and local agencies have looked to outsource that, so they could send it to private labs. So there's a variety of options. One thing that we explored, or I explored in my reporting, not in the podcast, but on WFAE, was a state like Idaho that was able to get some funding from their their lawmakers to expand their lab and hire more scientists, and it's made a difference in the amount of kits they're able to test.
Before we wrap this up, I do wonder what has been the one part of reporting on She Says, whether it's this 4th episode or one of the upcoming episodes, that has really opened your eyes to this process that a sexual assault survivor must go through?
A lot of things. I did not understand the ins and outs of how hard it is to arrest someone for a crime. I know that sounds really basic, but DNA is really important, but it's not like this DNA hit comes back from this mysterious database and then the cop just goes out and arrests someone. There's this whole other process that has to occur to make sure it's the right person, which is, of course, a very good thing. But, there's several DNA samples involved in analysis, and it is not fast.
And DNA, as we heard, in the 3rd episode, DNA is golden, but then sometimes DNA is not golden?
Yeah, if you have it, it is hard to dispute, but getting it is the challenge.
Yeah. Can you give us a preview of what episode 5 will bring us?
Yeah, so episode 5 is going to be we're going to take a little bit of a turn and explore Fayetteville Police Department and how they handled a situation a couple years ago where they disposed of sexual assault kits. Again, it wasn't illegal, but they did do it, and the police chief, Harold Medlock, who we've actually talked to in a previous episode, he used to work at CMPD. He towards the end of his career, he was in Fayetteville, and he handled this situation differently than CMPD did in 2016 when they also were found to have done the same thing. And we will, of course, get back to Linda because at the end of episode 4, the detective goes and collects this very important piece of evidence from the man that Linda identifies, and we'll sort of let you know what happens with that piece of evidence.
And that episode 5 will be out next Thursday. So we hope that if you haven't already subscribed to the She Says podcast, you do so you'll get that episode as soon as it comes out. Today I'm here with Alex Olgin, health reporter for WFAE. She is also a reporter for the She Says podcast. So thank you for joining us today, Alex, and thank you for your work.
You're welcome.
And again, you can find the She Says podcast wherever you find podcasts, whether that is Apple Podcasts, Google Play, NPR One, or WFAE.org/She Says, where you can follow the investigation. We even have a timeline of events. There's a lot of things going on in this podcast, so we're keeping you up to date on that. We thank you so much for watching. We hope you join us next time. And for all of us here at WFAE in Charlotte, I'm Joni Deutsch. Thanks for watching.